us some stories from the old bridge room.
Okay. Yeah, what I was going to do, Ray, I know you had mentioned uh, kind of about my quest to my who lives where, who lived where. Um,
Yes.
uh, well, I started thinking about that last night, and I guess the one of the clear things, I guess, is obviously a lot of you know that in 1945, around May, there were about 75,000 people living here. But one of the things I used to track who lived where and who they were is simply the phone book, like a 1945 phone book. There's only about 4,000 people. Well, I should say 4,000 entries in the phone book. And some of those are businesses and other things. And so there's really only about maybe 3,000 people that had phones. So that tells you right away those 3,000 people were a little bit more, it was important for them to have a phone. Most of the other residents didn't have a phone. So I've basically taken the phone book and worked backwards to see who those people are. And sometimes there'll be a scientist from England, or there'll be, a military official or a business owner. Um, but invariably, it seems like it always comes back to almost everyone in there ends up being someone of someone that holds a lot of patents, held a lot of, of course, there's a Nobel Prize winner or two. I mean, Eugene Wigner. And as far as historic homes go, like on Outer Drive and Olney, a lot of the old O streets, like 163 Outer was Martin Whitaker's home. He was the first director at X10. And then when he moved, Eugene Wigner moved into that house. So it was the director's house. And they talk a lot about the hierarchy of D houses and F type houses. The bigger, nicer semestos were often homes to, colonels, military officials or prominent scientists. And so I within the Oak Ridge room, of course, we have the city directories and the phone books, and we have some housing assignment records that I found recently that are actually from 43, and they're more dorm housing, who was assigned to certain dorms, which was a pretty big find. I've been looking for that just in an odd folder somebody had donated. I just came across that a couple of weeks ago. Haven't really had a chance to look at it. And coincidentally, I noticed earlier spies were mentioned, and a couple of years ago, I had figured out Arthur Slack, who was one of the spies at Y12, who had worked for Tennessee Eastman in Kingsport and came here, um, actually lived in an E building on Vermont Avenue. And that I discovered that through some of our oral histories. Just a kind of a mundane oral history just happened to mention about this guy getting a visit from the FBI and a visit from security because he moved into the apartment where Slack had lived, and they really scrutinized him and searched the apartment. And this is all in an oral history that we had. Actually, Manfred Bay's oral history. And I kind of like to read the oral histories just for recreation when I'm not working. And it actually mentions, and it's about where Burger King sits now, one of those E buildings that was on that stretch of Vermont between the old bank and the E build and the Burger King is where Arthur Slack would have lived, which is kind of interesting. Of course, he, eventually was arrested and convicted and everything else. It's of course the spies are extremely elusive. I actually kind of looked for him for about 10 years, and by process of elimination, really by luck in that case. Um, and of course, certain streets like Olney Lane, I guess, was the most prestigious street. We had Arthur Compton, Nobel Prize winner, lived there right across from Colonel Nichols. Um, and in Nichols' biography, he talks about their being friends, their wives being friends, and they went to Gatlinburg and Sevierville area to see the mountains when they had some downtime. Um, but of course, I said Olney is interesting because you've got Nichols, and I don't know if that was kind of a security thing, and there's mostly all military people, and then there was Dr. J.R. Coe, who was a chemist living at the end of the street. So everyone on that street was fairly prominent. And what I like to do, of course, I like to drive around and basically take the city directories and phone books and kind of write down who was where. And then you get a sense of a lot of them live very close together. Like Clark Center, the plant manager, lived at 36 Outer Drive. And George Felbeck, the Carbide president, lived on Oak Lane, which was just around the corner. And really, if you kind of drive up and go around Ogden, Paul Huber lived there for a while, plant manager. I mean, a lot of the managers and a lot of the upper level scientists lived within a quarter of a mile in a way of each other, less than half a mile. in certain pockets of town. And I don't know if any of that was intentional. Um, there's a story that Clark Center evidently rode up California Avenue, rode on with the bulldozer, and picked his spot based on as they went up California, went on outer. If you look at 36 Outer Drive and 34 Outer Drive, the mountains are really nice there. And I can imagine back then, I think he just told him, "Stop! I want my house here." Is the story of an old time Oak Ridger. Um, and so that's where he lived. And evidently, Fairbeck, the Carbide president, had sort of picked that same stretch, but I think he was in New York and kind of missed the boat and had to end up going on Oak Lane, which is still a nice little street up there. Another interesting fact is when the pile went critical at X10. Another one of the things, and of course, there's a couple of stories about it, but I kind of like to look at it from that geographical standpoint of where Wigner lived. Right across the street was Arthur Snell, who had also worked with Ernest Lawrence and with Oppenheimer, and Snell was here to help when they assembled the Calutrons. But if you look, Snell lived there, Wigner lived across the street. Fermi and Louis Slotin, the criticality expert that was later, killed himself inadvertently by an accident at Los Alamos, Slotin was here. So the story was that Slotin, I think there's a couple of stories about who was driving, but Slotin evidently picked up the people at the Alexander, or took Fermi, and I guess they came through and got whoever else was there, Wigner and Snell, and they rushed over to X10, when the power went critical. And so when I started thinking about that, I was thinking about how close they all were living and staying, together, and they all drove over in a couple of cars. I mean, some of them were obviously already there waiting, but the ones that were home were taken down there. So a lot of times I'll just try to do time travel basically and think about what things were like. And I walk a lot, so I like to walk around the yards and kind of notice. I've been here my whole life, and I'd written an article about my paper route that Ray had in his column, and years later I realized almost everybody that I delivered to was either a physicist or a chemist. This was in the 70s, and a lot of them were actually World War II generation, and they'd started retiring. There were all sorts of characters there, and really nice people. I love my customers. And then at some point when I started working for DOE, working in records, I would see, oh gosh, this guy was a chemist, this guy was a physicist, and I would see records of where they had been to Sweden for some symposium. But when I was 10 years old, living in the papers, I had no clue just how, accomplished some of these scientists were. And it was a neat time actually in Oak Ridge in the mid 70s to see, all the yards were very well kept, and there was a lot of these people were the same people that, were members of the Art Center, members of the symphony, and things like that. So I still, one of my hobbies, which I've got an article coming out for the library about reading newspapers. I still read newspapers a lot from the 40s all the way up to about the 70s. And, the Oak Ridge room, of course, we've got all the Oak Ridgers on microfilm, and the Oak Ridge journals also, and they're phone books and newspapers and city directories, have a wealth of information. And it might sound boring, but I spend a lot of time cross-referencing, looking at the entries and trying to figure out and track down. I'd like to make a map. I've got lists and I've got maps, but someday I'd like to kind of merge, maybe a little bit in a Williamsburg sort of way, who lived on what street. I mean, I have a lot of data, but I haven't ever really officially, it's kind of intimidating to try to throw it all together. The city has a nice overlay up the hill from the library there that I'd like to kind of incorporate, and they're wanting to highlight that too. But that's pretty off the cuff, Ray. I don't know if you had any particular questions or areas you'd like to talk about.
No, I really appreciate you doing that. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, I got you.
Good. I've got too many computers going here obviously to know which one's coming through, but I think my iPhone is the one that's actually working, and we really appreciate that. Let me open the floor up for questions, and Ann, I'll ask you to help me monitor the chat, and if someone gives a question through the chat, help us to get it. The rest of you, if you would like to just unmute yourself one at a time, please. The rest of us should stay muted so we don't get feedback. But if you have a question for Mike, let me give you that opportunity now. to just chime in and ask a question.
This isn't a question, just a comment. I didn't realize what a prestigious neighborhood I live in, although I'm on the wrong side of Outer Drive at number 37.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, right across there. Clark Center lived there, and then he moved to Kingston. I think he lived there the whole time he worked, and then he moved to Kingston after he retired. But yeah, up and down Outer, gosh, I see Dixon Callahan, who was another prominent K-25 person, lived on Oak Lane also. And right around you there, I think on both sides of the street, I usually recall a few off the top of my head. Outer, Ogden, Oglethorpe, all those were just kind of littered with science engineers and scientists and a few military personnel. Yeah, so 37. Yeah, that's neat.
Anyone else have a question?
Question from Mike. You have a lot of information you're putting together. Have you figured out how you're going to make that permanent information that anybody else who can't see into your mind would be able to retrieve?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I'd like to. I had fantasies of doing almost like a sort of an encyclopedia or a guide. And initially, I'm driven by the people, the personnel, and then I kind of started doing the genealogies of the houses. So yeah, I would love to do a sort of a history like that has an alphabetical listing of personnel. And with the houses, I do have the histories of a lot of the houses. It's funny, when in 45 when they were first doled out and they had the houses. Some houses by the time 1947 rolled around, well, from 43 to 47. One house may have had 12 occupants. And it was funny, even though there was a hierarchy of it, they still would house swap. Like I noticed, I grew up on Euclid, and on Euclid Circle, I would see like E.C. Bollinger was a K-25 manager. Well, all of a sudden now he's living on cross town. And I think it was a matter of they lived in a B, they might have wanted a larger D house or an F house. And so they just kept on. If so-and-so got promoted or moved, then somebody would have their first dibs on their house. So that makes it complicated, although I use a lot of meeting minutes and things like that. So yeah, it's something that I definitely need to get recorded and there's still so much more data to uncover. But yeah, I would like to have something I can have at the library that would be a reference for both, for the personnel and the housing.
I have a question from Jim Rushton saying, can Oracle come and visit the Oak Ridge room sometime?
Yes, as soon as the library opens back up, which we haven't gotten any definitive word. There's been talk of gearing up. We've been remodeling. We painted some stuff, carpeting, expanded the Oak Ridge room. There were a few stacks taken out next to the Oak Ridge room. They've expanded more than doubled the size, and we got a storage space. Since it's been closed, we've had a lot of donations. A lot of interesting things have been donated, Oak Ridge related materials. But yes, we'd love. It was kind of sad. I started about a year and a half ago, and then 9 months of that have been pandemic. So it's been frustrating not to be able to share stuff that we have. But yeah, that would be neat to do a little tour or just I'd certainly welcome that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have any other chats that people have sent.
Okay. Here's something from, I see.
Is it to Jackie?
From Dick Roop. Did we get that?
Oh, okay. Yes, that just came in. I saw it. William E. Tews lived at 304 East Forest Lane.
Yeah.
Tews became a division director at Y12. Any idea who else lived on E Forest, especially 305? It's quite close to Olney, Outer, and Oak.
Yes, Bill I worked at K25 in the engineering records and the technical reports, and we had a lot of Bill's records there. Yeah, Bill kind of underappreciated. Bill did a lot of technical papers. We had a whole box that was basically a Bill 2's box. I don't even know if Bill knew we had that or not, but yeah, and Mark Fox, who was the who originally Y12 and was the S50, the military personnel that managed the S50 project, lived on East Forest too. I think somewhere within a couple of houses of Bill too. So yeah, East Forest actually had several prominent people that lived on there. Yeah, that's
neat.
yeah.
I have a question for
Okay.
the, I guess for the more non-prominent people.
Mhm.
My grandfather worked at Oak Ridge. He was a painter. I mean, how would I find records of him?
Well, you could send me, his name and what all you know about him, and you could find. Now, as far as actually records, you'd want to file a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, through DOL. Now it'd be sort of through Department of Energy, and the Department of Labor processes them and ask for his payroll and things like that, medical records. And if did he work for Carbide, it would be a little easier because they have better records for Carbide than some of the subcontractors. But yeah, I always like to poke around and see. That's what I used to do. I used to process sick worker claims and Freedom of Information Act claims, and that's kind of what sparked me to, expand on what I was doing. But yeah, the painters and the carpenters and I don't discriminate. I mean, I'm curious about who lived where and what they did. My grandfather was a welder, and I live in his house right now. I live in a B house, which was my grandfather's house that he moved into in 1950. So yeah. I would love to look in. It's always exciting if you can find something, about, especially if someone's interested. Yeah,
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
sure.
Anyone else?
That's all I see on my screen of the chats.
Mike, I'm not sure that you talked about Nichols' house. Did you mention where he lived?
Well, I mentioned he was on Olney, right across from Arthur Compton, Nobel Prize winner and the head of the metallurgy lab. And Nichols, actually was extremely involved in the town. Unlike Groves, who kept a really low profile and really didn't want anybody to know he was here. Nichols, gosh, he was at charity fundraisers, and he was kind of more the face of the town than a lot of people realize. He and Jackie, his wife, also was. Seemed like there's a lot of pictures, and plant bulletins are another good resource. The Tennessee Eastman bulletins and the Y12 bulletins, and they all cross over. The three plant bulletins all kind of. There were a lot of Y12, X10, and K25 information in each bulletin. And yeah, Nichols shows up. Nichols' wife shows up a lot, and yeah, I kind of think Nichols deserves a little more credit for his, not only running the town from that standpoint, from the military and managerial standpoint, but he was involved heavily, and just seems to show. There's a lot of like ladies' club meetings, like wives' clubs and things, and his wife is at a lot of those things, and Nichols is too. He's shown with children and with other citizens just all over town at various functions. So yeah, and interesting as far as him living there, then A.V. Peterson, who was another prominent military guy, lived on down the road about a half a mile from Olney, and Jackie, Nichols' wife, was actually related to Peterson, and later on they say that Nichols and A.V. Peterson would jog, and they would jog, I think around Delaware and all around that area, and so sometimes it's neat just to see. Nichols' book is a good one, A Road to Trinity. It talks a little bit about the town, and it does mention his residence at 111 Olney. Martin Kamen, who you could look him up. He was one of the carbon-14 dating pioneers. The process of carbon-14 dating. His biography mentions Oak Ridge a lot. He kind of got in trouble because he was here at Nero Ornell just waiting and figured out what was going on and kind of mentioned the fact that, they're working on a reactor. And then they pulled him aside and said, "How do you know that? Why are you talking about that?" And he said, "Oh, you can tell." So he got blacklisted just from that Well, Martin, he talks about going to Ernest Lawrence's house or apartment on Tennessee Avenue, somewhere in the vicinity of behind Big Ed's, and it doesn't give, it gives an address, but it's a little ambiguous. It kind of, I thought it was an E building once, the one that got torn down that was behind Big Ed's, but then the actual address they give is another Semesto house. But it does talk about, it says near the theater and the camp store, which I'm assuming is kind of like where Oak Ridge Sporting Goods used to be, or on the corner on the maps there. But it's right in that vicinity is where Ernest Lawrence lived, and they say that he was here, to help assemble the Calutrons, and he had a apartment reserved for him, and he might have had I think they had students and people that were helping to assemble. Well, they evidently played tricks on him, and they would put broom handles with shoes on him and make footprints on the ceiling. They would do all kind of stuff, and he completely ignored it. He knew it was going on, but he knew they were trying to mess with him, some of his other scientist friends. And Martin Kamen talks about that. But yeah, there's all kind of little neat stories of what went on with the more prominent scientists like Ernest Lawrence. I never really thought about the fact that he was here as much as he was, but they didn't advertise it. With Groves, with Fermi, the most prominent scientists were very low key, assumed names and stuff like that. But there's always new stuff to be found. I mean, some of it's laying at federal records or things people donate to the library. So yeah.
Any other questions for Mike? Well, tell us what's happening at the Oak Ridge room. I know that it's being expanded. Talk about that a little bit. I know the library is not open right now, but it will be soon.
Yeah, we've expanded. One thing they're going to do that will benefit. It may not be ready right when we open, but I'm hopeful. We're going to have one computer that's designated for research, and it may be located outside the Oak Ridge room in the extension area that they've done, and it'll have some extra databases. It'll have the typical, have of course the Ed Westcott photos. We've scanned the yearbooks recently. I'm just now getting finished up. There was a program. I started at 44, and the 2020 ones all the way up to modern times have been scanned, and then they're going to upload the first so many years, I think from 44 to 47, so that you can see them on the website, and some of the rest of them will be available at the library in the computer, the database computer, and there will be some housing information, and there's just ongoing scanning projects of city directories and phone books and things like that, just anything that's pertinent to the history. And as I mentioned earlier, we had some more donations of things while we've been closed. We had a pretty large collection of Oak Ridge journals donated, and we already have them all. But I'm always reticent to turn down anything like that because of condition sometimes or a missing page. And in between each one of those, there were documents. It was really neat. There were some old school documents from '43, and so I'm going to try to get those things scanned. So I'm trying to digitize as much as I can so people can see things as we get them uploaded on the website. So that's one of the big things. And just to be able to pull out things that are in storage and get them, there's things I didn't know we had when I first started. Since we've been closed, we keep digging up stuff and they keep bringing me stuff. And I find new things almost weekly that are pretty historically significant that have just been sitting in a drawer. So hopefully that'll be, maybe by May or June, some of that stuff will be available in person or digitally on the computer.
Very good.
Just kind of cleaning up and getting it ready to open. There's a lot of work. We're going to get some. I think some UT students are going to come help us with some of the scanning and cataloging, which will be good, real helpful.
I have a question.
Antiques Roadshow had a complete set of Oak Ridge journals. It's one of their items about a year ago. You aware of that?
Who did now?
It was on the Antiques Roadshow.
Oh yeah. I saw that. They looked to be in really good shape. And yeah, I can't remember. It seemed like I remembered who the lady was.
Somebody in Kentucky, I believe.
Yeah, and that was a really good collection. We have two collections of them, but they're not in that good a shape. I'm trying to get them, and we have them microfilm, but I'm trying to fill in the gaps on some of the microfilm. They were filmed years and years ago, and some of them where like the same edition is filmed twice and the next one is skipped. So we're trying to do a little QA on that so that they're all 100%. scanned.
Question regarding microfilms. I heard that the microfilm readers that were in the library, some of them have been removed to make space for other things. So are you depending on just one machine? Suppose that machine breaks down, what
You
happens?
know, that's a good question. You know, the one that they used is the more, or that they kept, of course, is the more modern one. And I was much more used to the other one. That I was much more comfortable because it's a hands-on kind of thing where you're scrolling, and I had it. And so, yeah, I think that one, I'm hoping that that one is in storage. But we've got the digital version, you know, the one that's more advanced, and it's taken me a month, I'll acknowledge, to get. I'm still not really as comfortable because it still has a delay in it, and it's a little bit more cumbersome to me than the old manual one, because I can kind of control it with my hand. And yeah, right now we've got the one is the one they're going to be using, and they've moved it into the Oak Ridge room, and I've got the film cabinet right behind it, so it's all. So I did mention recently this article that I had written on newspapers that should be out in a week or two. About the idea of if you need help with that machine, because it is a little different. It's not, once you get it down, it's not hard. It's just I was so used to the other one for using it for 10 years. The new one is a little trickier to master. And it could be, if there's enough demand, maybe we can either bring that other one out or get an additional one. The more activity we have, the more, you know, they're likely to do that.
Well, if you have space to store then you're in good shape.
Yeah.
What sometimes happens is all the playback machines, maybe for audio recordings or video, become obsolete. They all get thrown out, and then you can't see or hear what you had before.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question.
Mhm.
This is Becky Rushton.
Yes.
I am the curriculum chair for Oracle, and I really would like to arrange to bring a group to see the Oak Ridge room. How do I contact you directly?
Well, of course I can, I am listed on there, my number. I can give you my number, my phone number.
That would be so helpful.
Yeah. And basically, I mean, it's a city number right now. It's a 425-3467 is my direct line to the Oak Ridge room.
That's great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and if I'm not there, the regular reference, William and Virginia, the regular reference people, they can get, you know, a message to me if.
Excellent. We'll look forward to seeing you this summer.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yes.
Anyone else? All right. Well, Michael, thank you very much, Mike, for coming and being with us. And if you have the time and wouldn't mind, we'd appreciate you joining us next week and the following week, if you like.
Sure.
We
Maybe
will have Alexia.
Yeah, that sounds fun, Ray. Thanks for having me. Maybe I can focus on be a little more organized, and I'll get you a particular topic, maybe that's a little bit more.
All right.
But yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, that'll be good. And of course, we'll have Alexia again at the beginning of the class, like we did, and he will be getting into the secret cities of Russia, I'm sure, the next time. I would encourage the rest of us to think of questions that we would like to ask Alexia and Mike as well, but Alexia for sure. This is I think, a very unique opportunity for us to hear from and interact with someone who left Russia, who was being prepared by the Russian government for reaching out to a section of the world in India, and who decided, no, he would rather come to the United States. And has become a travel writer. And I really enjoyed giving the tour to Alexia and his daughter. I was amazed by two things. One, his knowledge of and interest in the spies, especially the one that has been George Koval, that has been recognized by Putin and given him the highest honor award that Russia has to provide citizens posthumously, but he did get it. And Alexei knows a good bit about George Koval and has researched his history somewhat. And then I was amazed by his admiration for and interest in our International Friendship Bell. He really spent some time there and asked a lot of questions about it, and he found it to be just very of interest to him, as it has become an icon for the city of Oak Ridge. And he spent a good bit of time down there with me at that bell.
Which is the secret
Okay.
city in Russia?
There are several of them, James, and he will share them with you. He will actually have some photographs that he can show you of those cities, and we'll let him do that the next time he's here. There's several of them, not just one. Other questions or comments about anything you'd like to bring up or anything you'd like me to focus on other than fixing all my computer problems by next week? I have changed that file over to a PDF file, so I'll have my mouse. But I don't know what has caused my computer to actually die twice. So I'll be experimenting with that thing, trying to figure it out. Any other comments or questions?
Ray, at one point when you were trying to get back on, I had a message on my screen that said you had low bandwidth. So I don't know if that has something to do with you're getting kicked off or not, but you might want to check your input.
No, I appreciate that. I think that is a product of my internet connection, and it may mean that I'll have difficulty with videos because of bandwidth, but that wouldn't cause my computer to just die. And it did. It would just quit completely. So I've got to check into that. We've got 3 more minutes before I have to let you go. Is there any closing remarks of anyone? I don't dare try to show that slide again. What I'll tell you that it has in it, and I'll include it in next week, so I'll have figured it out by then. But it has an update on the demolition activities that are going on in the city of Oak Ridge. All of the buildings that are coming down, and a little bit about the future plans about which buildings are in line for being demolished. And I think that will be of interest to you, just to see the schedule that we're on. And of course, you know, if you've been paying attention at all, the biology complex buildings, 9210 came down, I believe last week or week before, and 9207 is getting ready, very close to coming down. And I have a couple of pictures of those that I'll share with you, but we'll have an update on the demolition activities that are going on around the complex. Anything else? Any questions anyone else has, or comments from anyone else?
What is Michael's last name?
Mike Stallo, S-T-A-L-L-O.
Thank you.
See, Mike, if you put that on there, she wouldn't have to ask. You've just got Michael on your.
Next time, I'll do that next time.
Thank you. And thanks for that information. That was really good.
Well, thank you. Thanks.
I'm afraid to do anything to, I can't help it.
I think Mike should have a time travel tour of the top secrets at Secret City.
That would be fun.
Just to show you I'm not completely unable to.
There you go. Yeah.
I can't stand it. Although I have difficulties with this technology, I enjoy using it, and I'm proud we have it. And I'll try to not let it take up any more time than it has to. Okay, I stopped.
Yeah, it's satisfying when it works, that's for sure.
Yes, I know. All right.
We have a
well, I'm gonna
comment
close-
from a couple of people just saying, thanks, Ray and Mike. Thanks so much. Enjoyed it all. And I echo that.
Well, thank you very much. I again apologize for the ridiculousness of the computer problems, but maybe we won't have that next week. Maybe it's got it out of its system. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you again next Monday.
Thank you, Ray.
Thanks.
Bet.